It was a Saturday, July 10th, 1993, the kind of Pacific Northwest morning where the air smelled like salt and pine needles. A ferry horn echoed across the bay, low and distant, as gulls wheeled above the sleepy docks of Port Townsend, Washington. Locals shuffled into cafes along Water Street. Tourists clutched maps and cups of drip coffee. At the ferry terminal, the MV Klickitat sat idle, her hull groaning against the pier as the morning tide shifted. Boarding would begin in 20 minutes. A red Volvo 240 pulled into the long-term parking lot. Clean, modest. The kind of car that said school teacher or civil engineer. Inside sat two people, young, quiet, focused. Daniel Lowe, 28. A systems analyst from Olympia. Marissa Bell, 26, a pre-K teacher, and his fiancée. They stepped out of the car, stretched, and Daniel locked the doors. Passers-by barely noticed them. Just another couple, headed to Whidbey Island for a weekend away, one of hundreds who crossed the Puget Sound each week. But Daniel and Marissa were never seen again. They didn't make it on to the ferry. They didn't arrive on Whidbey, and when their parents called that evening, no one answered. The following morning, the red Volvo was still in the same spot, windows up, nothing inside disturbed. The keys were gone, so were Daniel and Marissa. At first, it wasn't alarming. Maybe they rented bikes, went for a hike, missed their return. But by Monday, when work calls went unanswered and friends hadn't heard a word, the mood shifted. A missing persons report was filed. Flyers were printed. Police questioned ferry staff, cafe workers, parking lot attendants. The only solid clue was their car ticketed and time-stamped for 9:47 a.m. just before boarding began for the 10:15 ferry to Whidbey Island. That detail, that single timestamp, became the spine of the official theory they made it to the ferry. Something must have happened after they boarded, but there was a problem. No one remembered seeing them on the boat. No crew member, no fellow passenger, no camera. This was 1993, and the Port Townsend dock had yet to install CCTV. In that absence, the silence swelled. Rumors came next. Maybe they drowned, jumped off the side. Maybe they ran away, started over somewhere. Or maybe, just maybe, something worse. By week's end, news crews arrived. Young couple vanishes en route to Whidbey Island, the headlines read. A reporter stood on the dock wind, blowing her mic flag, and said Daniel and Marissa's car was found right here, parked and locked, but they never arrived. Their families say this is out of character. Police are treating it as a possible abduction. Detectives combed through ferry manifests. They weren't listed, but it wasn't required to register as walk-ons. Back then, foot passengers simply paid at the booth and boarded. Investigators interviewed baristas, shopkeepers, ferry ticket agents. A man who sold postcards at a stand near the dock claimed he might have seen a woman in a green sweater, but couldn't confirm. Marissa did own a green sweater, but so did 100 other women that summer. Without witnesses or forensic evidence, the story hardened into mystery. Then it faded. Weeks passed, then months. Search parties stopped. Posters peeled from telephone poles. Marissa's mother, Eileen, appeared once on local television. Her hands trembled as she held a photo of her daughter and said, "We don't need theories. We need answers. If someone knows something, anything, say it. Please." But no one did, because it seemed no one could. 11 years went by. Children grew up. New families moved to town. The dock was rebuilt, and with it came security cameras, turnstiles, scanners, all the modern things that couldn't help with what was already gone. By 2004, Daniel and Marissa's names were rarely spoken, just a cautionary footnote in old police files. Until one afternoon in early fall, a woman named Lori Sanders unlocked the roll-up door to a storage unit she'd inherited from her late uncle. Unit number 44, Tacoma, Washington. The key had been sitting in a drawer for years. Her uncle had passed in '98, but she never got around to clearing his things. Inside was the usual holiday decorations, a sofa yellowing newspapers, and in the back, beneath a blue tarp, was a large red suitcase. It was sealed with tape, heavy, cold to the touch. Lori opened it with a box cutter, and what she found inside stopped her breath. Folded neatly inside a men's shirt and jeans, a woman's floral dress, a pair of hiking shoes, a wedding card unsigned, 3 rolls of undeveloped 35mm film, and at the very bottom, wrapped in a soft cotton scarf, 2 paper slips, faded, stamped, dated July the 10th, 1993. 2 one-way tickets from Port Townsend to Whidbey Island. Untorn. They had never been used. The discovery reignited the case. The suitcase was turned over to police, and within weeks the timeline fractured. Everything investigators believed in 1993, that Daniel and Marissa had boarded the ferry, was wrong. They never made it. They had disappeared before the boat left, which meant it hadn't happened at sea. It hadn't happened on the island. It had happened here, on land, at the dock. In the shadow of the ferry they were supposed to board. Karen Doyle, a ferry terminal worker who'd been there that day, was brought in for re-interview. She had long since retired but remembered the case. When shown the sealed tickets, she went pale. "I always wondered," she said. "I always wondered why I didn't see them walk on." She had looked at hundreds of faces that morning, but not theirs, and now she knew why. "They never passed me," she whispered. "They were supposed to, but they didn't." Back in Olympia, Daniel's brother Michael walked into the reopened police briefing with tears in his eyes. My brother was quiet, not the type to run. He had just paid off his car. They were talking about having kids. He took the ferry tickets in gloved hands, stared at them for a long moment, then said these weren't forgotten, they were hidden. And so the story began again, not with a ferry, not with a wave, but with a suitcase, 11 years sealed, waiting, remembering. Port Townsend was the kind of place where strangers didn't stay strangers for long. Nestled on the northeastern tip of Washington's Olympic Peninsula, it was part Victorian postcard, part maritime skeleton, streets lined with antique shops and wind-weathered homes. The salt air always carried a hum, gulls' halyards clinking distant horns. It was a town that remembered things, and for years it remembered Daniel and Marissa. After the news broke of their disappearance in July 1993, something in the rhythm of the town shifted. Not drastically, not enough to stop ferries or cancel festivals, but just enough to be felt. Baristas looked out windows longer. Old men at the marina spoke softer. Locals began locking their doors earlier, something they hadn't bothered to do in decades. No one wanted to believe something could happen here, but it had. Daniel Lowe had first visited Port Townsend 2 years earlier. He wasn't a native born and raised in Spokane, but he fell in love with the town during a solo photography trip. He brought Marissa with him the next summer, and it became their place. They'd walk the pier sketch in notebooks and eat pie at the dockside diner with the green awning. By 1993, they were engaged. Quietly. No big announcement, just a gold ring and 2 train tickets to a life they were building step by step. That weekend trip was supposed to be a getaway, their last, before wedding planning began in earnest. Instead, it became the beginning of an unanswered question. After the ferry left that Saturday morning, no one noticed anything amiss for hours. It wasn't until that evening, when both sets of parents failed to reach them, that the alert began. The first responders checked the vehicle. The red Volvo was still parked in the long-term lot, perfectly positioned between 2 faded lines. Nothing seemed stolen, no signs of forced entry. Inside were only crumbs, a receipt from a gas station, and a paper coffee cup lukewarm molding by day 2. It didn't feel like a crime scene. It felt paused. Eileen Bell, Marissa's mother, drove out from Tacoma the following day. She walked the dock in silence, clutching her daughter's photo. She wouldn't run, she told the detective. She was the one who made our Thanksgiving lists in July. She planned everything. Reporters swarmed by Monday. TV vans parked along Water Street. They filmed shots of the ferry leaving dock, zoomed in on the rust-stained benches where Daniel and Marissa might have sat. But with no evidence of foul play, the coverage faded fast. Local headlines gave way to national ones. Soon the story was just another mystery at sea. But the people of Port Townsend remembered. In cafes and boatyards in the aisles of the corner grocery, the same question kept surfacing. Did you know them? Did anyone actually see them on the boat? Why leave the car locked? A waitress named Gloria, who worked the morning shift at Harbor Cafe, recalled serving them coffee. She said they ordered drip with cream, shared a cinnamon roll, paid in cash. They were calm, she said, smiling even. I remember thinking, that's the kind of couple who lasts. But that was the last confirmed sighting. No one remembered them boarding. No one remembered them leaving. Just vanishing. Over the following months, theories filled the vacuum. Some swore it was a boating accident. Others said they'd faked it, all moved to Canada, started over. One man, a local conspiracy nut, claimed it was a government abduction. The ferry routes are perfect cover, he muttered at town meetings. But most people just didn't know what to think. It gnawed at them. Detective Len Hadley, the lead on the case in 1993, revisited the parking lot nearly every day for the first 2 weeks. There was something wrong about how clean it all was, he told an interviewer years later. No struggle, no noise, like they got plucked out of time. He checked every manifest, cross-referenced names, tickets, cash transactions. But nothing unusual appeared. The ferry had left with the right number of cars, the right count of foot passengers, give or take a few casual walk-ons. No one saw a scuffle. No one reported screaming. They just weren't on it, Hadley finally admitted, but no one could explain why. Then came the postcards. 5 weeks after the disappearance, 2 postcards were received, one by Daniel's parents, one by Marissa's. Both postmarked from Astoria, Oregon, both handwritten, both unsigned. Daniel said, "We're safe, just need time. Please don't look." Marissa said, "Don't worry, this was the only way." The handwriting looked close but not exact. A forensic analyst declared them inconclusive. For the families, the postcards were salt in a wound. If they were really from them, Daniel's brother Michael said they would have called. They would have used our names. Police believed the cards were a hoax. maybe a cruel joke, maybe something worse, but nothing could be proved. So the case was shelved, cold, filed under presumed voluntary disappearance. But not everyone could move on. Gloria, the cafe waitress, kept a copy of their last bill scrawled with a smiley face Marissa had doodled in syrup. She taped it inside her locker. "I didn't know her," she said, "but I saw her, I served her." And then she was gone, just like that. In 1998, a documentary crew passed through town to film a short about Ferry culture. When they heard about Daniel and Marissa, they tried to license old Ferry footage, only to discover no surveillance had existed prior to 1996. That realization, how close the truth might have been, left a bitter aftertaste in the town's mouth. They slipped between eras, one resident wrote in a blog. Between analog and digital. Between memory and proof. By the early 2000s, the story had become almost folklore. Teenagers dared each other to visit the parking lot at night. Locals claimed to see a woman in a green sweater standing by the dock, only to vanish when approached. A local artist painted a mural near the terminal, two silhouettes stepping toward a ferry that had already pulled away. Below it read, "Some crossings never begin." It stayed up for years, until 2004, until the Suitcase. The strange thing about ferry terminals is how quickly they forget. Thousands come and go, faces blur, moments slip past the lens of memory like mist off the sound. The morning Daniel and Marissa were last seen, everything was routine. Or so it seemed. It wasn't until after the ferry departed that anyone realized something was missing. Not just two people, but two whole lives. And no one could prove where that missing began. Detective Len Hadley sat alone in the back office of the Jefferson County Sheriff's Department 3 days after the vanishing. Laid across his desk, maps, ferry schedules, 2 photos, one of Daniel, one of Marissa. He drew a straight line from their parking spot to the dock entrance. Then he stopped. That line, the one connecting intention to action, was where everything broke. There was no camera footage, no reliable witnesses, no confirmed purchases after 9:47 a.m. when the car had been parked. The official theory said they walked from their vehicle to the ferry, boarded, were lost at sea. But there was a problem: no one saw them make that walk. In missing persons cases, the first 48 hours are critical. Hadley knew that. But by hour 72, he had nothing. Not a scarf, not a footprint, not a single confirmed sighting past the parking lot. He called it a disappearance between minutes. Like they stepped off the curb and into a void. He re-interviewed the barista at Harbor Cafe, the postcard vendor, 2 ferry deckhands. No one could place the couple on board. One ticket agent remembered a man wearing a windbreaker and carrying a blue backpack, but couldn't recall if a woman was with him. Daniel didn't own a blue backpack. Marissa had a green tote. It wasn't found. The Washington State Ferry Service was cooperative, within limits. They confirmed that no passengers were reported missing from the Klickitat that day. No man overboard, no panic, no police dispatch while en route. Frankly, one supervisor said the ride was uneventful, which meant that if Daniel and Marissa vanished, it hadn't been during the crossing, but before, which raised a darker possibility. Hadley began expanding his search radius. He canvassed a 2-block radius from the parking lot, checked alleyways, bushes, dumpster bins. Nothing. He then turned to the car. The red Volvo had been towed and impounded. Inside was undisturbed, as if its owners had stepped out for coffee and never came back. Back seat empty. Trunk clean. Glove compartment contained only registration insurance, a road atlas with a folded ferry schedule, no signs of struggle, no blood, no damage. But the one odd thing, no fingerprints. Not even Daniel's. The steering wheel had been wiped clean. So had the door handles. Gear shift, mirror. Only one usable partial print was found on the inside of the passenger door, and it didn't match either of them. Hadley now believed this wasn't a case of falling overboard or elopement. This was calculated, clean, professionally executed. But why Daniel and Marissa had no criminal history, no debt, no enemies, no large life insurance policies, no motive, and yet no trace. He brought in dogs from Seattle's scent-trained canine units. They were given Daniel's sweatshirt and Marissa's scarf. Both dogs traced the scent from the car to the edge of the parking lot, then stopped. Not toward the ferry terminal, not toward the cafe, just the edge. A dead end, as if they'd been intercepted or redirected. In September 1993, a break came, or so it seemed. A man hiking near Fort Worden State Park found a scrap of cloth in a shallow ditch, green damp tangled in thorns. It resembled the cardigan Marissa was last seen wearing. The area was searched, but nothing else was found. The cloth was tested. No blood, no DNA. It could have belonged to anyone. Still, Hadley kept it. He pinned it to the corkboard above his desk. It was all he had. He followed dozens of leads. Calls came in from Idaho, Montana, even as far as New York. Someone matching their description checked into my motel. I saw them hitchhiking off Highway 101. My neighbor's tenants left behind photos. Maybe them. Each one ended the same. Wrong couple, wrong time, wrong story. By December, Hadley was exhausted. The department was out of overtime, and the state closed the file. Status missing persons. No resolution, no further leads. He boxed up the case, labeled it Low Bell Disappearance, PT 1993. He didn't throw it away, but it was buried, literally. Second shelf, bottom drawer. The town moved on, at least publicly. Privately, the story lingered like salt in a wound. New families who moved in heard whispers. This is the place where that couple vanished. You know. Long-timers grew quiet when asked about 1993. And every July, when the wind shifted just right and the gulls circled lower, someone would mention them again. They were nice kids, Gloria the waitress would say. Quiet, kind, didn't deserve this. Then came the suitcase. The reopening of the case in 2004 changed everything, but also confirmed what Hadley feared. They never got on that ferry, which meant he had been right and also wrong. Right to be suspicious, wrong to believe they'd ever gotten near the dock. They were already gone by then. Taken. Looking back, Hadley pointed to a chilling possibility. What if they were never the target, he said. What if someone was practicing? That idea haunted him. Because in the decade after Daniel and Marissa disappeared, other couples had gone missing. Not in Port Townsend, but across the Pacific Northwest. Always small towns, always ferry routes, always clean exits, and never solved. But the suitcase, that was new, and inside it what they found would force the entire case to bend. Because not only were the tickets unused, they were wrapped in something else. A note, just 3 words, not written in Marissa's hand, Not Daniel's either. A different script. Unfamiliar. Tight. Pressured. We never left. Some stories don't die. They wait. In locked rooms, in forgotten corners, in dust-covered objects that once belonged to someone who never came home. In September 2004, Lori Sanders stood inside a steel storage unit in Tacoma, Washington. Unit No. 44. The late afternoon sun cut through dust in soft diagonal beams, lighting up cardboard boxes, a sagging sofa, and unplugged mini-fridge. She hadn't planned to come here. The unit belonged to her uncle, dead since 1998. The rent had been paid up through an estate account. Nobody had touched it in 6 years. She turned the key, lifted the roll-up door, and blinked at the stale air. At the back half, hidden by a tarp and a cracked dresser, was a red suitcase. It looked old, leather-trimmed, taped across the zippers with electrical tape. She thought about leaving it for last, but curiosity won. She dragged it into the light. It was heavier than expected. Kneeling beside it, she ran a box cutter along the taped seams. The zipper creaked. A puff of old fabric air escaped like a sigh. Inside, a neatly folded blue Oxford shirt, a flowery sundress, one pair of hiking boots, a camera bag, a toiletries pouch, small shampoo bottles, a toothbrush. And at the very bottom, wrapped in a soft scarf faded with time, 2 ferry tickets. Issued July 10th, 1993. Port Townsend to Whidbey Island. Untorn. Unused. Lori didn't know what she was looking at, but something felt wrong. Why would someone lock away 2 unclaimed tickets for a crossing from 11 years ago? She called the number on the back of one of the luggage tags. Disconnected. Then she called the police. Detective Alan Kessler was a quiet man with 2 decades in the Tacoma PD and a memory for headlines. He arrived at the unit 40 minutes later. When Lori showed him the contents of the case, his face went pale. The shirt matched one Daniel Lowe had been wearing in a photograph printed in the Olympian in 1993. The dress, yellow floral small, looked just like the one Marissa Bell was seen in at the Ferry Dock Cafe. Inside the camera bag was an undeveloped roll of 35mm film, and inside the toiletries pouch, a tiny slip of paper, folded 3 times, stuck beneath the lining. He opened it with tweezers. Scrawled in blue ink in small capital letters, "We never got on." The Port Townsend police were notified immediately. Retired Detective Hadley, now long off the case, was pulled back in as consultant. When he saw the suitcase, he whispered one word. Finally, the entire narrative of the disappearance collapsed and reassembled in one breath, because the story for 11 years had assumed one thing: that Daniel and Marissa had boarded the ferry. Now that assumption was gone, because you don't bring untorn tickets with you onto the boat. You bring them when you plan to board and never do. The forensics team took the case apart piece by piece. The scarf was confirmed to be Marissa's. Hair strands matched hers. There were partial fingerprints on the zipper, too smudged for identification. But one sample from the camera bag strap revealed a clean DNA profile. It didn't match Daniel, didn't match Marissa, didn't match Lori's uncle either. A male subject, unknown. His DNA was now in CODIS, the national database. No hits, but it was something. The suitcase itself had no name tag, but the lining under UV light revealed an ink stamp, Luggage Town, Seattle, WA. A specialty store. defunct since 1995. Tracing records led to a batch of 30 suitcases sold on July 3, 1993. Cash. No buyer name. But one receipt listed red travel case, 25 in, number 2187. They found the same code written on the suitcase's wheel bracket. It was a match. Whoever bought this suitcase did so exactly 1 week before Daniel and Marissa vanished. The discovery prompted a full reopening of the case. News vans returned to Port Townsend. Newspapers that hadn't run the couple's names in over a decade now splashed their faces across front pages again. Sealed suitcase reopens 11-year-old Ferry mystery. Eileen Bell, now gray-haired but still sharp, stood before cameras and simply said, "I knew she didn't run." With the tickets confirmed unused, the old timeline shattered. Detectives returned to 1993 with new eyes. If the couple never boarded, where did they go in the hour between parking the Volvo and Ferry departure? That was the new window. 9:47 a.m. to 10:15 a.m. Only 28 minutes. Witnesses were re-interviewed. A cafe employee now recalled a man pacing near the payphones. Tall, quiet, wore a blue windbreaker, seemed to watch the parking lot more than the water. Another tip came from a warehouse manager across the road who reported back in 1993 hearing a sharp noise like a car door slam and a shout around 9:55. That report had never been followed up. Now it was everything. Detectives checked storage unit records for the one that held the suitcase. The rental was signed under the name J. Browning. ID and documents were fake. But security logs from 1993 stored on microfilm showed the unit was first accessed on July 10, 1993. The same day. One-time entry, never visited again. The suitcase had sat untouched for over a decade, waiting. Back in the lab, the roll of film was developed. Grainy shots, a picnic, a lighthouse. Daniel holding a book, Marissa with wind in her hair. Snapshots of their final days. But one photo stood out. In the corner, out of focus, was a man. Tall, bearded, wearing dark glasses, leaning against a payphone outside a gas station. The timestamp, July 9th, the day before they vanished. A forensic artist reconstructed the image. The sketch was broadcast on the evening news. Calls came in, many false, one promising. A woman in Everett said the man resembled her former tenant. Name was Charlie, but he got mail addressed to an Elliot something. She described him as quiet private, always paid in cash. Moved out in July 1993. Detectives ran a cross-check on aliases using Elliot and eventually landed on a sealed juvenile record from 1982. Assault, restraint, disappearance of a younger girl, never charged. Name, Elliot Brandt, the same man. Too early to say. But the shadow was growing. For now, the suitcase sat in an evidence locker. Still, heavy, holding silence, but not forgotten, because inside it, Daniel and Marissa had left something more powerful than proof. They left presents, their toothbrushes, their film, their ferry tickets, and the note. We never got on. It was cold storage, not just figuratively. A literal bank of old evidence lockers in a sub-basement of the King County Sheriff's Annex, lit by a single overhead bulb flickering and buzzing like it resented being there. The clerk wore gloves not because of contamination protocol, but because this place hadn't been touched in years. Inside locker number 1082 sat a cardboard archive box. It was labeled Recovered Locker Contents, SeaTac Bus Terminal 1993. Until now, no one had connected it to the Logie Bell disappearance. It had been cataloged under Abandoned Property, logged July 11, 1993, the day after Daniel and Marissa were reported missing. It contained a gray nylon duffel bag, a paperback copy of Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance, one men's leather belt, a red pocket journal, and a receipt from Luggage Town, Seattle Doabue, the same store that sold the suitcase. Detective Alan Kessler stood in the annex hallway holding the receipt under the fluorescence. The date July 3, 1993. Same batch, same day, same item code. The receipt was signed shakily with a single name, C. B. Elliott. The name matched a pattern that had emerged in the days following the suitcase discovery. C. Elliott, Charles Elliott, Elliott Brandt, a man known by many names, known for vanishing into the cracks. Kessler drove straight to the bus terminal storage logs. He found the original locker rental card. The ID used was a Washington state license, expired. Fake, likely. But the handwriting. It matched the suitcase note. Same pen pressure. Same tight spacing. Same strange habit of slashing through the middle of the capital E. The note found in the suitcase had said, "We never got on." This card said Locker 91, rented by E. Charles, returned by 7:15. There was no return. Only silence. The journal inside the duffel bag had no name, but its pages told a story. It began as a log ferry schedules bus routes, sketches of buildings in Port Townsend. Then it shifted. Lists, initials, phrases, K&M, watching lot, 10:15 Ferry, a clean window, M wears green, same hair, car unlocked, photograph, ill liability. Page after page of surveillance-style notes. Names shortened, no full identities. But one sentence stood out written in darker ink near the final page. "They'll go quietly if I smile." Kessler shut the journal, hands trembling. The locker's contents were sent for DNA analysis. The belt strap, skin cells. The book's margins, thumb smudge. A hair strand on the duffel zipper, medium length dark. The lab ran all three through CODIS. One match. The same partial DNA profile recovered from the red suitcase. A man. Unknown. Still nameless, but now linked across two cities, two caches, 11 years apart. The profile was assigned the code name X93 Male. The media frenzy reignited. Headlines screamed, "Suitcase mystery tied to second locker in Seattle. Surveillance notes found, stalker's diary." Podcasts pounced. Crime boards lit up with speculation. Who was X93 Male? Why had he tracked Daniel and Marissa? Why store items but not use them? Why wait 11 years? Meanwhile, back in Olympia, Daniel's brother Michael received an anonymous envelope in the mail. No return address. Inside, a photocopy of a bus ticket. One way, Seattle to Reno. Dated July 11, 1993. One day after Daniel and Marissa vanished. Seat number 6A. Passenger E. Charles. The ticket was never used, but it had been printed. Michael turned it over. Written on the back in ballpoint pen, not Reno, wrong direction. He brought it to the police. Kessler stared at it for a long time, then said quietly, he got spooked. The investigators developed a theory. Whoever X-93 male was, he didn't just abduct Daniel and Marissa. He watched them first, tracked them, planned. Then something went wrong. Maybe they resisted. Maybe someone saw. Maybe a camera was nearer than he thought. Whatever it was, he backed off, didn't run far, but ditched evidence, stored the suitcase, stashed the duffel, burned everything else, left the state unlikely. This wasn't a man who fled. This was a man who waited. But why them Daniel and Marissa were average. No enemies, no controversial backgrounds, but that was the point. Kessler believed the attack was about control, not motive. They were symbols to him, he said. Two people on the edge of change, leaving one life behind, starting another. He inserted himself into that moment and rewrote the script. Kessler returned to Port Townsend. He walked the terminal again, this time with the journal. He followed the paths, compared sight lines to sketches in the diary. The details matched perfectly. A bench near the cafe, the planter box by the payphones, the rust pattern on the long-term parking meter. It was all there, which meant the notes were real. Not fiction, not fantasy. Stalking logs. Back in Seattle, the cold case unit dug deeper. They found an incident report from June 1993. A woman had reported being followed at Green Lake. She described a tall man with sunglasses carrying a sketchbook. Didn't say anything, just stared. Drew in it. No name. No charges. But she remembered his hands. They were too clean, like no dirt, no calluses. Pale, like a person who practiced being invisible. That description made it into Kessler's notes, filed under profile, X-93 deliberate erasure. A profiler was brought in from Quantico. She studied the journal, the suitcase, the timeline. Her assessment, he's an organized introvert with ritualistic behaviors. Likely spent months preparing. He targets transitional moments. Travel, engagement, thresholds. He wants control over when people disappear, not just how. She paused. And he probably still has artifacts. The locker, the suitcase, the note, the journal, each was a breadcrumb. Together they pointed to a larger map, but one that wasn't drawn yet, because somewhere out there X-93 male still had something, still knew something, and whatever he knew, he hadn't shared it yet. Every town has ghosts, but some ghosts are travelers. They don't haunt a single place. They ride roads, slip onto ferries, step through bus stations. They leave no whispers, only silence. By the winter of 2004, Detective Alan Kessler was no longer chasing the disappearance of Daniel and Marissa. He was chasing a map. It started with a whiteboard, 3 names, 3 cities. 1993, Daniel Lowe and Marissa Bell, Port Townsend, WA. 1997, Andrew Langston and Melissa Cho Anacortes, WA. 2002, John Rivera and Katie Neal, Bainbridge Island, WA. All missing, all couples, all last seen near ferry terminals, All vehicles found abandoned doors, locked, no signs of struggle. All presumed accidents or voluntary disappearances. Until now. The Langston Cho case had gone cold almost instantly. They were young, backpackers, on their way to Orcas Island. When their car was found a blue Civic with Alberta plates parked near the dock with tickets inside the glove box, police assumed they'd made it onto the ferry and wandered off. Or perhaps joined an off-grid group that rumor was common in the islands. But now Kessler pulled the file again. Inside an item overlooked in 1997, a receipt from Luggage Town, Seattle. Same brand, same ink, same week before pattern. He ran it under UV light. There, faint, nearly invisible, was a symbol, a small triangle with a slash through it, the same marking that had been found inside the flap of the 1993 suitcase. It wasn't branding, it was a personal signature. Next Bainbridge. John Rivera and Katie Neal, both Seattle-based, planning to elope in Friday Harbor. They vanished in August 2002. Their car, a rental, was found in a long-term lot, no trace of either. Local authorities chalked it up to a runaway couple. Young love. Another statistic, but Katie's sister, a private school teacher, had never accepted that. She'd kept everything. Every voicemail, every journal. Kessler visited her in Tacoma. When he explained why the red suitcase, the ferry, the duffel, she turned pale, then walked into her closet and emerged with a cardboard box. Inside, a Seattle street map, a printout of ferry routes, a worn paperback copy of Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance, and a Post-it stuck to the inside of the box lid. John mentioned a man who asked for directions twice. Weird eyes. Same guy at both docks. The note had never made it into the official record. Now it changed everything. 3 couples, 3 vanishings, same geographic corridor, same eerie calm, same absence of noise. And possibly the same man. X-93 male wasn't just a kidnapper. He was a collector. Kessler built a timeline. Every incident occurred in July or August, each within 7 to 10 days of a holiday weekend, each preceded by reported sightings of a tall, pale man, sometimes sketching, sometimes pacing, always quiet. Ferry logs showed similar anomalies. Passengers reporting someone sitting alone without bags who never disembarked. Ticket agents logging voided fares hours after departure. And a tip from 2002, a woman who said she saw a man talking to himself by the terminal lockers, all dismissed, now resurrected. The FBI officially entered the case in March 2005. Agent Larissa Quinn was assigned lead profiler. Her first statement to Kessler was simple. You don't have a missing persons case. You have a behavioral sequence. She called it transitional targeting. The suspect chose moments of movement ferries, highways, border towns, because they diluted accountability. People expect loss in transition, missed connections, forgotten check-ins, luggage lost, phones off, perfect cover for perfect vanishings. But there was more. The symbolism. Every couple was engaged eloping or newly living together, each pair on the cusp of a new phase, each vanished in motion. Agent Quinn laid out her conclusion. He inserts himself into lives like punctuation. He doesn't just erase, he rewrites. One cold night in a secure evidence lab, Kessler and Quinn sat across from each other with all the case files between them. A map stretched between coffee cups and audio tapes. Red pins, yellow tags, arrows. Quinn said, "You see that?" She pointed to a stretch of ferry routes that ran from Port Townsend south toward Seattle. There are 7 small terminals on this path. Only 3 had reported incidents, but all 7 had lockers. Kessler looked up. She continued, "He's not improvising. He's staging. Every disappearance follows the same choreography. He scouts, he tests, then he stores." She traced a slow circle around the central ports. "He's not gone. He's here, somewhere in this radius." They called it the Loop, a 90-mile radius of ferry-linked geography. Rural enough to hide in, urban enough to disappear through. They searched for patterns rental units, camera footage, cash withdrawals, library check-ins. One hit. A library card opened in 2001 under the name Charles E. Benton Everett Public Library. Address was a P.O. box. The card was used only twice. Once to check out a photography book, once for Zen and the art of motorcycle maintenance. It was returned 6 days before the Bainbridge couple vanished. The Loop became their hunting ground. They combed abandoned cabins, checked hardware stores for bulk electrical tape purchases, cross-referenced ferry tickets bought with cash. Then came the break. In May 2005, a storage unit in Shelton was opened due to unpaid rent. Inside, a rolled-up tarp, a Polaroid camera, a woman's scarf, and a single photograph pinned to the interior wall with a tack. The photo showed a pier, 2 figures, one walking, one sitting. A date was scrawled in ink on the bottom corner, 7/10/93, Daniel and Marissa. Their last morning, taken from a distance, grainy, but unmistakable. He had been watching. Even then, there was a rhythm now. Every few years, every summer, every ferry. The cases weren't echoes, they were refrains. In August 2005, it happened again. Emily Dre and Cole Ramirez were planning a quiet weekend. She was a freelance writer from Tacoma. He was a software technician based out of Redmond. They'd been dating for 3 years, recently engaged. Their plan, a 2-day retreat in Friday Harbor, reachable by ferry from Seattle to Vashon, then northward. They never made it. The last confirmed sighting came from a Chevron station near the Fauntleroy terminal. Security footage, time-stamped 7:41 a.m., showed Emily at Pump 3 filling up a silver Toyota Prius. Cole returned from the convenience store with 2 coffees. They laughed at something, the kind of moment that doesn't register until it's the last. At 8:04 a.m., the car pulled away. They were scheduled for the 8:45 ferry to Vashon Island. They didn't board. 3 days later, the Prius was located by Port Authority staff doing a routine sweep of the long-term lot. Doors locked, no forced entry, no valuables missing. Keys were in the cup holder. Phones turned off, left inside a backpack in the trunk. Gas tank 3/4 full. No prints, not even theirs. The first officer on scene noted something odd, a crumpled ferry brochure on the floor of the back seat. It had one word scrawled across the front in blue ink, "Remember." When the trunk was opened, things became darker. Nestled inside a side compartment folded flat beneath a beach towel was a Polaroid photo. 2 people, taken from behind, standing near a dock. The woman wore a yellow sundress. The man had on a blue shirt. Not Emily and Cole, but Daniel and Marissa. The same photo recovered from the storage unit in Shelton, except this was a duplicate, laminated, intact, clean, and deliberately placed. Detective Kessler arrived within hours. The second he saw the image, his stomach sank. It wasn't a repeat. It was a message. He said nothing at the scene, only held the photo up to the sun, watching the light bend off the laminate like a mirror. A task force was formed. The FBI, Washington State Patrol, and 3 local departments converged on the case, but the pattern was clear. Ferry route, engaged couple, early morning disappearance, abandoned car, no struggle, echoes of the 1993 case. Exact, deliberate echoes. This wasn't a random escalation. It was a planned escalation, a performance. Emily's parents released a tearful statement on national television. Cole's sister begged for answers, but the suspect remained absent physically, if not psychologically. His presence now pulsed through every ferry deck, every empty bench, every echo in the loading bay. They began calling him the Ferry Phantom, but Agent Quinn warned against that name. "He isn't a ghost," she said. "He's a man who wants to be mythologized, and we're feeding him the narrative." Investigators returned to the scene. Security footage at the terminal was reviewed frame by frame. And there at 8:13 a.m. was a tall figure walking across Lot C blue windbreaker. Sunglasses, a duffel bag over the shoulder. The figure paused, turned slightly toward the camera, then looked away. 2 frames later, gone. No approach to the Prius was recorded, no interaction seen. But the image was enough. Facial recognition failed. Too blurry, too distant. But forensic analysis noted one thing. On the duffel a patch, triangular, with a slash through the center. The same symbol stamped inside the suitcase in 1993. They now had the first recorded sighting in over a decade. Same build, same mannerisms, same quiet drift through space. The press went into overdrive. Ferry Phantom strikes again. Couples vanishing linked to 1993. Cold case online forums flared. Armchair sleuths plotted theories. But Agent Quinn focused elsewhere. She believed the laminated photo meant one thing he was revisiting. Not just the act, but the memory. That's when they found the locker. Terminal records showed that locker number 14 at Fauntleroy had been rented 2 days prior to Emily and Cole's vanishing. Name used E. Brandt. The ID was false. The address, a storage unit in Everett. They opened the locker on August 17th. Inside, a pair of gloves, a ferry schedule folded in quarters, and a third Polaroid, same image, slightly out of focus, and a typed note taped to the inner wall. It's always the ones who are just beginning. For Agent Quinn, this confirmed her theory. The suspect was not simply reenacting, he was refining, perfecting a ritual that had begun in 1993. Each couple wasn't just a target. They were chapters. And Daniel and Marissa, they were his prologue. Kessler stared at the photo for hours that night. Same dock, same 2 figures, but something had changed. A shadow in the corner, a shape not present in the earlier prints. Closer analysis revealed it, the edge of a second figure closer to the lens. Not posing, not observed. Watching, from behind the photographer, as if someone was photographing the photographer. What did it mean? Was he working alone, or was someone else documenting him? A witness, an accomplice, or most terrifyingly, a successor. The investigation split into two directions: track him or trap him. But Kessler feared a third option, that they were already too late, that the fourth couple, Emily and Cole, weren't the end. They were the beginning of the finale. Because rituals, once perfected, often require closure. The house on Tanglewood Lane had stood quiet for years, empty, dust-laced, paint curling from the windowsills like old parchment. It once belonged to Joseph Brandt, an alias, a name Kessler had long associated with nothing more than a post office box and a forged rental lease. But in October 2005, the property changed hands. The new owners, a retired couple from Bremerton, hired contractors to restore the interior. 2 weeks into the work, a carpenter, prying open a warped interior wall, made a call that stopped everything. Inside the wall, behind faded insulation and crumbling drywall, they found it. A cavity sealed with tape, carefully, deliberately cut. Inside a thin, cloth-bound notebook, its pages yellowed but intact. And on the inside cover, in small typewritten font, field notes, Port Townsend, July 1993. It wasn't a diary. It wasn't a confession. It was a chronology, a record, a plan. Page by page it read like preparation for a ritual. Sketches of the Ferry lot, distance calculations from dock to tree line, weather notations, wind from SW, ideal for concealment. Lists, 2-person capacity. No resistance if separated. Code phrases: smile first, ask directions, don't corner. A final line: only interfere when stillness is possible. Detective Kessler stood in the center of the gutted living room, holding the notebook in latex gloves, heart pounding like a clock run too fast. The FBI took over the analysis. But Kessler stayed. He walked the room slowly, measured the wall depth, ran his fingers across the seams in the paneling. Then he saw something, a faint discoloration on the far wall, rectangular, vertical, a cut. He motioned to the contractor. Together they opened it. Behind the drywall was a cavity, and inside, wrapped in an old linen cloth, was a cassette tape, unlabeled, unmarked. The tape was digitized within hours. No music, no conversation, just sound. Ambient, raw, low fidelity. It began with footsteps, crunching gravel, wind, a distant ferry horn, then a voice, male, soft, controlled. I wait, I watch, I wait, I watch. I wait, pause. 2 today, both talk too much. I think they'll go quietly. More wind, then silence, then breathing, then a single word, whispered. Marissa. The tape stopped. Room silent. Nobody moved. This wasn't just a record. It was presence, time encoded. The wall had remembered what no one else did. Within hours, the notebook and tape were confirmed to match partial DNA samples from both the suitcase and the locker. X-93 male confirmed to have lived in the Tanglewood house. The case now had a center. Investigators tore through property records. The house had been purchased in 1991 under the name Joseph Brandt, paid in full cash. No digital footprint, no birth record, no family. Inside a closet in the basement behind a false panel, they found more maps, marked ferry schedules, 3 blank Polaroids, and a sealed envelope addressed to the one who finds this. Inside, a letter typed on an old typewriter. They never screamed. They never ran. They asked why. I said nothing. I chose them because they were moving, because they were in between. People who are in between are easy to break. I'm sorry that I'm not sorry. The note had no signature, but the handwriting on the envelope, that same sharp slashed E, was unmistakable. DNA from the envelope was entered into the system. Still no match. Whoever he was, he remained nameless. But the notebook, the cassette, the tapes all finally linked the 3 decades of disappearances into a single body of evidence. Then came one final discovery. In the attic beneath a floorboard, a small box. Inside, a gold necklace, initials MB. A Polaroid of Daniel smiling reading a book, a Ferry token, and a page torn from Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance. The passage was underlined. You are never dedicated to something you have complete confidence in. No one is fanatically shouting that the sun is going to rise tomorrow. They know it's going to rise tomorrow. When people are fanatically dedicated to political or religious faiths, or any other kind of dogma or goals, it's always because these dogmas or goals are in doubt. Agent Quinn studied that line for hours. Then she said, he didn't believe in anything except the power to erase. That was his religion. No bodies were found, no trial, no arrest. But the case was closed. Officially classified as serial abduction pattern, unresolved subject identity. But for the families, it wasn't closure, it was confession. In a small ceremony on the shore near Port Townsend, the families of Daniel, Marissa, Emily Cole, and the others gathered. They threw white flowers into the Sound. One for each person never returned. The wind was calm that day. The ferry horn sounded across the water, low, echoing, beautiful. What remains now is silence, and what walls remember. And a photograph faded with time of 2 people standing at the edge of something bigger than they understood. Not lost, not forgotten, just paused in a moment that someone once captured, then buried, then watched rot in the dark, until someone was brave enough to knock on the wall and ask what it remembered.